Welcome back, everybody. We are going to be talking about mood disorders now. So there's a huge wide range of normal feelings, responses to things that occur in life, right? And certainly as first responders, you are consistently witnessing all of life's extremes, right? You deal with victims of violence, you deal with car accidents, you deal with fires, you deal with losing individuals that you're trying to save, and that is going to provoke a wide range of emotions. It is very common for first responders to experience exaggerated emotions in response to the presence of consistent trauma, but that's normal. That's healthy. That's a normal, healthy mood response. Under these circumstances of extremes, it would be abnormal if you didn't have extreme, exaggerated emotional responses. But mood disorders occur when that exaggerated emotion is present and recurrent, when there are no extreme circumstances in the environment. There's nothing that would trigger those wide-ranging emotions that make sense in the environment. But yet people have these grandiose, very wide rays of depression, mania, irritability, so much so, and so consistently present that it begins to interfere with people's lives, and they have a hard time maintaining relationships. They have a hard time holding a job. They have a hard time interacting with people in general. So this is something that you will certainly come across, especially in a lot of domestic incidents of mood disorders. So there are 5 categories of mood disorders. And the first is a major depressive disorder. This is intense, and I mean intense sadness and depression that lasts for a minimum of 2 weeks, and it interferes with daily function. Everybody gets depressed at some point in life, whether you lost your job, you lost a loved one. Everybody experiences depression and sadness. But major depressive disorders are so overwhelming and it's so pervasive that you can't get out of bed. You haven't showered in 5 days. You're not eating. Right? Your hair becomes terribly matted and knotted from being in bed so much. You can't leave the house. You can't bring yourself to leave the house, let alone go to work on a daily basis. Like I said, these individuals will often withdraw from the workplace, from social relationships, from day-to-day activities, like getting dressed, brushing your teeth. I mean, it might, like a week might go by where they're like, I just don't have it in me to get up and take a shower and brush my teeth. For extended periods of time. They experience intense hopelessness. They're prone to excessive crying, excessive sleeping. These are people who might not get out of bed for days at a time. They are prone to excessive eating or not eating at all. Those are the sort of 2 opposite responses that people with major depressive disorders happen, where either they're eating to comfort the depression and the emotions, or they're not eating at all. They lose their appetite and they start dropping weight very quickly. They have an overwhelming preoccupation with death, with suicide, or plans of their own suicide, which is certainly where first responders are going to engage with people of this capacity. People who unfortunately are successful in killing themselves, people who are unsuccessful in killing themselves. Both law enforcement is going to respond and EMS is going to provide care. And certainly, hopefully, not just provide care for that incident, but get them connected with the services that they need so that they don't have future incidents of self-harm. Episodes of major depression can last for 9 months. So think about that. Think about 9 months of not being able to get out of bed, bathe, eat, function, see people. However, when it is successfully treated, individuals usually get back to normal function. And again, we typically go with pharmacotherapy here. There are an abundance of antidepressants, SSRIs that treat major depressive disorders and help people get back to a place chemically where they can function and have stability. There are some rare instances when people with major depressive disorders can slide into psychosis, so that's important to keep in the back of your mind. There's also something that we call dysthymic disorder, and that is chronic depression that lasts for 2 years with no more than 2 months of emotional relief at a time. So you have chronic depression, but you might have here or there some breaks in the depression, but never more than 2 months at a time. It's ever present. It lasts really long, notably longer than the major depressive disorder. But the emotional lows are not as intense as a major depressive disorder. The emotional lows of a major depressive disorder are overwhelmingly intense, whereas dysthymia, the lows are a little less low. They're a little higher, but it's always there, and it's there for a really long time. It's there for a really long time. They often tend to have an absence of suicidal ideation, and they don't experience psychosis. So depressive disorders are typically treated, like I said, with pharmacotherapy, with psychotherapies, and behavioral therapies. Next, we're going to talk about bipolar disorders. The average age of onset is 20, and interestingly enough, if you do not demonstrate symptoms by the age of 40, the odds of ever having the experience or the diagnosis of any bipolar disorder is extraordinarily low. So really, there's that window in life from 20 to 40 where people experience the onset. Um, the mental illness is characterized by shifts in mood from intense depression to intense mania. Okay. Mania is a behavior that is characterized by grandiosity, elation, often it manifests as irritability and social aggression. And they have excessive amounts of energy. When somebody is manic, you can see it, you can hear it, right? Frequently, their speech will be rushed. They'll be talking a mile a minute, right? Because their thoughts are also racing. They have racing thoughts, and so they start speaking faster to keep up with the thoughts. They will engage in behaviors that simply don't make sense, like you know today I'm going to move by myself. I'm going to move all the furniture from the upstairs to the downstairs and from the downstairs to the upstairs because they're trying to expend some of that energy. Um, in a manic state, individuals are looking to seek pleasure. It is not uncommon for somebody in a state of mania to go on an excessive spending spree, to go on a gambling stint, right? And it's not at all uncommon for them to be indiscriminate sexually and to be hypersexual in states of mania, engaging in a lot of sexual activities. It's something that is really important to note that people with bipolar tend to love their mania. Um, I'm sure nobody loves their mental illness, but it's a very euphoric feeling, that energy, that elation, right? And there are times people with mania, they have mania for so long, they go for without sleep for 2-3 days at a time, and they are literally manic the entire time, which is certainly not physically healthy or safe for them. Um, but that's also when the mania really starts to spiral out of control. And sometimes we see people in manic states engaging in crime because there's a huge amount of impulsivity while people are manic, which means they make poor decisions. In a manic state, hallucinations and delusions can also manifest, which is going to impact their decision making. They can't distinguish between in those instances what's real, what's not, but they are still making decisions according to what they see in the external environment. Um, a manic state is very similar to taking certain categories of drugs, specifically stimulants. And so it's important to understand that this is another reason why people with bipolar disorder tend to love their mania. When they have their mania, they don't run to get it treated. They may even be resistant to getting it treated because it just feels good, right? And I'm getting so much stuff done. And I'm superhuman right now. But eventually that mania will come down and it will crash. It will crash into depression. But while they experience it, it's a very euphoric feeling. And often you will find that bipolar individuals will also engage in high levels of drug use, trying to mimic or repeat those manic states. There are two kinds of bipolar disorder. There's bipolar 1, and that is when an individual has at least one manic episode in their life that lasts 1 week or more. So think about that for a second. A whole week, 7 days of mania is a lot. It's a lot for the individual physically undergoing it. It's a lot for the people around them. It's a lot for the community to manage and handle. So first responders are going to come into contact with people in states of mania. However, for people with bipolar 1, they tend to spend most of their lives at the other pole, and that's the depressive pole. So they have mania, but the mania is more rare. The depression is more ever present. Bipolar 1 can result in states of psychosis in extreme circumstances. Bipolar 2 has major depressive episodes with at least one hypomanic episode. And a hypomanic episode is sort of a watered down state of mania. It's not full blown mania, but it's still elevated to the point that we still consider it mania. It's not normal behavior. Um, but numerous depressive states and hypomanic episodes that last for 2 years that do not have any interruption of that depression or that mania. People kind of oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Let me jump back. A hypomanic episode lasts for no more than 4 days, and it's not as intense as bipolar 1's mania. Hypomanic episodes cannot result in psychosis, and full-blown mania doesn't happen in bipolar 2. So you're less and less likely to engage with these people, but still completely possible. Finally, the third category is called cyclothymic disorder, and this is individuals who suffer from mild depressive states and hypomanic episodes. So again, they have mania, but it's not the full-blown mania that can, spiral into psychosis, right? It's watered down mania. And the difference here between cyclothymic disorder and bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 is that these episodes last for 2 years without any interruption. Okay. Some people refer to this as the kinder, gentler bipolar, right? It's because the poles are not as extreme, right? So with bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, you've got mania over here and you've got depression over here and you've got going back and forth. Whereas with cyclothymia, instead of being over here, it might be more like this, but you still have that shift back and forth, those swings. There's an incredibly strong genetic predisposition to mood disorders and bipolar disorders in general. They're very heritable. They tend to be handed down through the family lines. This illness is often successfully treated with medication. There's a lot of medications that we have out there to treat bipolar, but unfortunately, they frequently come with extreme side effects. And when I say extreme negative side effects, it might make somebody gain 60 pounds. It might destroy somebody's sexual appetite completely, right? And then people start to weigh those costs and benefits that great, I'm not having mania, I'm not having depression, but I feel awful, I look awful, I don't want to have sex, it's ruining my marriage. And people start to say, okay, like is the treatment worth it, right? So there is a really big non-compliance issue where medication is concerned with people who are bipolar. Another thing that's really common among people who are bipolar is that the medication starts working, they stabilize, their mood stabilize. And by the way, when they stabilize, you would never tell them, you would never be able to pick them out of a room. They function just like everybody else. It's amazing how quickly the medication can get it under control and take something that was a really unruly state and make it completely and totally normal and manageable. But a lot of times once people get into that normal, manageable stage, they think, I'm fine. I mean, I think this whole thing was just a blip. I don't need medication. But the fallacy there is that the reason you feel fine is because you're taking the medication and the medication is working. So that's a very common issue with people who are bipolar is thinking I'm completely fine. I don't need these meds anymore. They stop taking their meds and then they slide very quickly back into the two extremes of depression and mania. Like we talked about before, medication pooping out. Medications for bipolar, unfortunately, are notorious for pooping out, meaning that they will have great success for a period of time and suddenly one day just stop working. And again, that is a big risk factor because when they stop working, people very quickly slide back into that depression and into that mania, which results in all sorts of behaviors of self-harm, social disruption, domestic disruption, etc., where first responders might be getting involved. This process can be very time consuming and emotionally difficult for people to try on new medical treatments. It takes a good 6 to 8 weeks for those medicines to build up in a person's system enough for them to feel a benefit and to see if it's working. So they have to be on a medication for 6 to 8 weeks and then realize it's not working for me. I have to try something else for 6 to 8 weeks. Or they take a medication for 6 to 8 weeks and it's like, okay, I'm not manic, but I'm so tired. I can't stop sleeping as a side effect of this medication. We have to try something else. It's very frustrating. It's very taxing. And a lot of people will get to a point where they just throw in the towel and say, that's it. I'm just not taking medication, right? And all of these things are going to see them spiral back into their symptomology. Like I said, it's for all these reasons that non-compliance of medication is very common for people with bipolar disorder. And people with bipolar disorder are at heightened risk for suicide because of that depressive pull. The depression is ever present, right? Mania can last a long time. I mean, 7 days is a really long time to be in a manic state. Um, but depression, that you will then swing to the depression pole where you might be for 2 or 3 months, right? And that's a long time to be at a very, very, very low place. So first responders are likely to engage with people who have these issues, people who attempt suicide, people who are successful with suicide, people who self-harm, who are bipolar. First responders should encourage suicidal individuals to talk about their frustrations, talk about their fears, their anger, right? It helps to not have some of that pent up. As many first responders know, sometimes the thing a person needs most is just somebody to listen, right? And it's important for first responders to encourage those who are suicidal to not shut off from the world. Offering resources and options can help manage those feelings. So if you are called to a suicide or an attempted suicide, making sure that that person gets connected with social services, gets connected with mental health resources, can be a catalyst for, okay, there's something that we can do to help you. So let's do it. Let's help you feel better. So having that information handy is really important, and presenting it is really important. If the individual is a danger to themselves or others, which can happen, especially in psychotic states of bipolar, first responders may have to make a decision to detain that individual in order to transport them to a medical facility where a formal psychological evaluation can be conducted. This is not usually met with calm emotions or easy compliance. So it is a delicate task to be handled as calmly as possible. Explain it as thoroughly as you can so that, hopefully the situation can be de-escalated. I'm going to switch gears here to a minute, and we're going to talk about something called, which I'm sure you've heard of, which is called suicide by cop. And this is an instance in which an individual wants to commit suicide, but can't bring themselves to physically kill themselves, or maybe have a religious compunction that doesn't allow them to engage in that behavior. So they try to create a circumstance where somebody else can kill them, specifically a police officer who is armed, who they know is obligated to respond with lethal force in the face of deadly situations. So unfortunately, this is something that first responders, police in particular, have to manage. It's incredibly traumatic for the police officers who are faced with this. These individuals will show up in a threatening capacity with a firearm or a knife, looking to threaten, making gestures and overtures that they're going to threaten the officer or threaten a member of society. Forcing the officer into a position where he or she has to use lethal force by firing on them. And it's a method of suicide. But boy, is this a really difficult thing for officers to manage. They can often recognize that this individual is suffering, is in trauma, needs help, but they're put in a no-win situation, right? Many times the people who force suicide by cop are people who are suffering from severe depression or some other mental illness diagnosis. So it's really important to understand that and remember that. It's not uncommon that after the situation is over, it's not uncommon to find that the weapon that they were using was a toy gun or a rubber knife or whatever, because they truly had no harm of intending anyone. They just wanted to force the hand of law enforcement and first responders to end their lives. De-escalation training is really, really important here for individuals in crisis and should be employed in such circumstances. And certainly there needs to be proper support and therapy for any first responder who finds themselves unfortunately put in this position.